All right, so this is going to, I'm just trying this app. I didn't announce I was going to do it, but I've been thinking about doing it, so I'm just going to play. I'm going to leave this up while I program if anybody comes along. There's a group chat there. So let's see what it looks like on my channel, shall we? So, testing 1, 2, 3. So this is like 60 seconds behind. Hmm.
Cheers to you.
Hmm. This is like 60 seconds behind. Well, let's just see if we have to. I don't know where people are going to see that. I am going to stop the video here so that I could see if there's any comments. We'll just see if anybody even notices when I'm live. Probably not. I mean, I just wish I knew what was going on. It's easier to make a video. Yeah. Testing. So it says I have 2 viewers, 1 viewer. That's me. So I'm not sure how this is going to work. So I have 2 viewers right now, and yet I'm not viewing it. So are those actually other people? Now it says 1 viewer. Plus, there's a chat that doesn't show up in the comments. There's comments that I don't really understand if this video is showing up to people that are subscribed to me in subscriptions. I would think so. Other people show up in mine. Hmm. I think this is better for having a conversation with people, like Skype style. Won't let me change the description. Okay, so there's this link that I could give you that takes you to hmm, okay, so there's this link that I could give you takes you to all right, I've just posted the link to join the actual Google Hangout. You might need Chrome, you might need the plugin. Uh, I really don't know. Um, I'm not planning to just talk and talk and talk, but maybe I will while I work. I'm just going to work, and I was thinking about starting a room regularly, so I was thinking about announcing that this morning, but I didn't. And so at the moment, I figured I wasn't sure about Tiny Chat. I like the idea that this records automatically. Um, so see, look, it's open. See, I'm hearing myself like 20 seconds ago. It's fucking ridiculous. So that's the delay. So if anybody, yeah, so I posted the link to the actual hangout where I guess you can get it live because it's like at least 30 seconds slow. And the other thing, why are the comments regular? Okay. Yes, Sullen Angel, I don't know if you probably left by now. You were here for a moment then. So I see the comments. Um, I've posted the hangout. Okay, one more recent post. So I guess Sullen Angel has posted that on Google+. All right, well, I have the link there, so I guess you need to click the link in the comments. I couldn't put it in the edited thing. If anybody wants to tell me how this works, I mean, that's basically what I'm trying to do is get it to work. So I figured people would want to talk to me about spirituality. They're freaking out about that. Or there's the issue that, there's so many things I thought we would get into, but I'm used to being wrong as to what people's reaction will be. But one is the difference between spiritual materialism, which I haven't been talking about yet, and material spirituality. Another funny thing is like this system of is as old. I think I've had the name of it even longer than relativistic skepticism, but since I don't talk about it online, people think it's new. Like I couldn't really have been thinking about it, as if, do you guys really talk about, or I should say, I know you don't talk about everything you think about in every part of your life, but do you think that you do? I don't know, it's weird. But what I'm really doing is I'm making this, so it says there's people watching, but why the hell would you be watching? Don't you want to converse, and at least one of you has to get in here and ask questions, otherwise I'm just going to program. So theoretically people are watching right now, but it's like 30 seconds delayed, so does that really count? So what I'm doing otherwise is programming. I'm working on the response DB, and I don't know that I can really do that and talk about philosophy. I would have to maybe even talk about, let's see, how can I show you? I can't really show you. Can you see? No, that's not going to work. So, um, so let's say I had said ahead of time that I was going to do. One reason I didn't is because I wasn't really sure what I would use, Tiny Chat, something else. And Friday nights are probably not good night for me to do it as a regular on a schedule basis, but I felt like checking it out. But what I don't understand is, let's say I did this and I announced it. What, everybody watching it through my YouTube channel is so far behind that it's like 30 seconds behind, so if they ask questions or something, it's going to take forever. Plus, I notice when some things are live, like the Young Turks, there's a chat window on the side. That's not here. And then there's comments here, but this is really ridiculous. Just to keep out. Oh, new comments. Click. I think YouTube sort of fucked this one up. So basically, my idea of spirituality is probably, after years of thinking about it, is that it is a good feeling. It's something, it's connected to some higher processing of seeing how things fit together without sort of the petty emotions in the personal situation. It's actually the closest thing we get to being objective, right? Because it's a perspective from which you can see how what you do affects others in sort of a big picture. Now, my fear about it is I've seen it help a lot of people drive themselves crazy, and also I've seen, and people I care about, that I wish would do better, and I've also seen, Joseph Smith. Oh, hey, somebody's here. 70-day star. Hey, how you doing?
Good, just wait, trying to control the sound.
Will you do effects of others? So is my mic just open all the time, right? I hadn't even thought about that. Is there a push to talk?
What's the default? Is the default on?
I have no idea. It doesn't say anything about that.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. No, it's definitely not push to talk right now, but I don't see where the setting even is.
On.
Oh, I see. That's the default. I thought you were saying push to talk. But when I do the...
What are you talking about?
Well, I was just waiting to see if anybody would show up, but I was going on in the meanwhile because I see that it's broadcasting about spirituality.
All right. So can atheists have spirituality, or is that nonsensical?
Well, I'm an atheist, so yeah. But the thing is, it's not really about having spirituality. I don't know if you've seen any of my recent videos, but I've been talking about it a lot. I don't see how to turn it into push to talk, so we'll just take our chances. No, I think that there's a feeling that we have that's when we say spiritual experiences, what is that body of experiences? Let's learn what spirituality is by going back to this raw data, which is just like what was going on when you were, feeling it was a spiritual experience. And if somebody sees a UFO, you could say, well, they saw something or they thought they saw something. They either saw something in the sky or they hallucinated that, right? So there was an image related to this experience of I'm seeing a UFO. Misapprehended or whatever, illusions, we will assume that there'll be illusions involved. And in the case of spirituality, though, it's always something different. Now, I've been running into people thinking, well, sure, last time I walked into a church, but I'm talking about, spiritual experiences that people actually have, including people who, might have had visions that I totally disagree with, like Joseph. That's what I was just talking about when you showed up. Like Joseph Smith, I believe he was having a spiritual experience when he channeled, the Book of Mormon, but I also think he was huffing mercury. So it's not to say that it's one thing or the other. It's to find out what are spiritual experiences. And the first step, the first thing I've noticed is all that really binds them is a feeling. You're having a feeling. It's an emotion like any other. And part of my premise, which nobody really challenges head on, I think they're so offended at the word spiritual from an atheist, is, is it a feeling? Is it like hunger's a feeling, obviously? Or, we can identify some feelings just like the five senses. Those are all impressions that we all say, yeah, we all have those. We can tell if somebody doesn't have, a sense of touch or they're deaf. And I think that, other feelings like besides the five senses, like hunger or pain, we can identify those. They're real feelings. It's not, or sexual attraction. They're real feelings. They have a type that's different from each other as color is from sound. And so, I would understand people challenging that I'm saying that there's a spiritual feeling. That basically there's so many different things in that spiritual category. And assuming we're getting signal out of the noise, like some of the things are misidentified as a spiritual experience, that signal is we're recognizing a fundamental built-in, by the genes, feeling. And then the question that I presented to other people, and this is something I've been doing for decades with myself, but it's a long question, so I think this is really to a degree where I still am, though I have some answers, is why? What good does it do? We know that hunger is to drive us for nutritional purposes. We also know that as an emotion, it can go awry. It's just designed to work in the environment we're in. It wasn't designed to work in an environment where there's plenty of food. So your hunger can go awry. But still, it is, we could see evolutionarily, probably as an atheist, hey, it's here to make us eat. What is spirituality doing? What's its survival characteristic? And then I think it's a good one. I think it's something we need. I've been saying I think whatever it is, I think it's something we need to basically have a will to survive.
I think it might be the resolution of a sort of an existential anxiety. I think it's the catharsis of an existential anxiety. I'll tell you, the first time I felt spiritual after I stopped being a Christian. I was a Christian, solid, hardcore, 5 years, and then I gave up on that. I was depressed for a good 6 months, and then I found myself beside a pond in the evening, sun's going down, it's the spring, red-winged blackbirds displaying everywhere, and I felt, wow, I don't know how this came about, and I had that feeling of awe. But I think it was the resolution of an anxiety over, well, where am I, what am I doing, and why? And I think you kind of just, it was that sudden gush of acceptance. That, okay, I'm not sure what this is all about, but wow, here I am.
Well, that's an interesting point. For example, Gary and the antinatalists, they like this idea that, there is no joy, there's just the feeling of a relief from suffering. In a way, that would say that it's not a real feeling. That could be one of the arguments against it being as real as pain, or even something like disgust that's built in, that because it's a missing feeling. And yet still, just like, you can recognize a figure in negative space or a silhouette of white on black, it still would actually kind of grammatically count as a feeling. It would actually, in a way, elevate it, because if what we're noticing is when we have freedom from anxiety, then the experiences we have while we're feeling that way would be all the more important, right? They would be the experiences that go with being free from anxiety, which I think is one of the biggest problems we face. And I just add, that's the kind of thing where when I started to think I really could identify this feeling, and I wasn't just calling a bunch of different feelings spirituality, say, because that's the miscellany bag. It's nature. In a beautiful, large vista view, I'll almost always have some of this feeling that has a flavor of a spiritual experience. And it
That's
is
certainly
free
what I
from anxiety.
my spirituality, nature.
So do you? Thanks. So do you? So you're an atheist now? It sounds like, or agnostic, or not? Which?
Atheist. I identify as atheist.
Yeah, me too. Though there's a little bit of rhetoric there, but it's just like my version is that it's atheistic. It's without theism. It's not about not knowing if I'm a theist or not. But see, I have this out to a certain degree that goes with that makes it rhetorical, in that if people think that means that you can't be spiritual, then I disagree. I mean, I believe, and I don't mean spiritual in the psychological sense I'm looking in. I mean, you could be a pantheist, or I believe some kinds of so-called theism or religions, are not really theists. I tend to think of theism as the big father God approach. So it's a little more Judeo-Christian for me, but it can also be, I could see that the theism of the Greek pantheon, not where it's the big father Theo, but there's the Zeus. But to me, it's that particular angle on gods. But then again, I don't always use my own words. I mean, when I'm talking about theism, I accept, the belief of gods as a definition for it. So still, it's, I'm quite clear I don't use gods to reason. So that's atheism. But so you're an atheist. So what about spirituality then? You said you had this kind of feeling. Would you consider yourself spiritual? Do you spend much time pursuing that, or having a relationship with spiritual feelings?
Well, what I think people identified as spirituality was this resolving of their existential anxiety, and some people do it on a regular basis. Every Sunday they convince themselves of this myth, and that serves the purpose. That's right, I have an anxious dog.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. Wasn't a bother at all. So where does that leave spirituality then? I mean, is that a healthy thing that we need to do that? Maybe not. Or are you gone? Can you hear me? I mean,
Yeah, I think he stepped away.
okay, yeah. So I'll ask him in a second. Just thinking that. Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you. So, um, I was just thinking a couple things. One, I mean, just to give feedback along the way too. I always wonder whether it just ask, but I'll inject the feedback. I'm wondering if I guess I feel it's an actual feeling of its own right. So it's more like a feeling that would cause a release of stress, but it could just be, the feeling of a kind of actual neutral, not just the neutral of normalized to what we expect, but actual neutral of I'm fine with actually everything and the cessation of that. But what I was going to ask you is, okay, so if people are going to church to do that and they're telling themselves a myth, and let's just say there's bad side effects to that. But is it still the medicine? It sounds like, well, if you don't do it that way, you need to do it some other way. And, I'm wondering if there's a way to do it without going through this feeling, right? Because you could be doing anything and have the spiritual experience or the feeling of a spiritual experience. And again, especially if it's just a cessation of other stresses. Well, I mean, what do you say? Do you say so? If you see going to church that way, it's kind of a classical revelation, atheist revelation of how it's not really necessary. There's other ways to get rid of your stress. Even if life is harder, maybe I want to be honest with myself. So, do you think it's necessary to do something instead of that? I mean, is it necessary to pursue this feeling? I would say a lot of the most well-balanced atheists I know still enjoy their time in nature, and they won't call them spiritual experiences, but I'm pretty convinced the feeling they get is this feeling I'm talking about.
I would agree. I think that religion would not have persisted for as long as it has if it didn't fill some role. And I think it's more than just community. I think that's probably its most important role, to provide a community. But in addition to that, I think to satisfy that existential anxiety is another role that it has. And I think I can do that by studying nature. And so as an amateur astronomer and a bird watcher and spiders and butterflies and whatnot, that's where I get my fix there. And I have to look for community elsewhere. But I think I think the honest atheist has to admit that there are some goods. There are some good things about religion. It wasn't all about duping people. So that's, I guess, I think. But I wanted to make a point earlier. I think when I think of my brain, it's the same parts. When I'm out there by the marsh, going, "Wow, this is amazing," I think it's this. There's probably the same parts of my brain that are firing when someone's at the revival meeting and going, "Our God is a great God." Probably. They're probably in the same location. If they're not exactly the same neurons, they're probably in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think so too. And one reason I think that is because having gone through, I mean, my original indoctrination was not very indoctrinating because, but it was present in a new agey sort of idea. My dad was a dropped out, tuned in hippie and not totally sincere. He kind of went back towards conservatism and a redneck hippie in a lot of ways, and so he was experimenting with these things, but still he was the most like indoctrinating a certain idea of, and by which I mean on the hippie spirituality kind of side of, if you could visualize a rose actually in your hand, it would become kind of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, all 3 chapters spirituality. And but my grandmothers were very much more open-minded, but they were into the Edgar Cayce and stuff, and before it all became really hip. But by the 70s, you had Shirley MacLaine and all the very popular press starting up with it, and so they didn't indoctrinate me as much and were more sincere, but had a skeptical approach to it because they were kind of consumers. of, and some of the stuff was old ancient things that, like one grandma liked the Rosicrucian Egyptian stuff, but then Edgar Cayce was just the generation before, and Shirley MacLaine was a contemporary. So so I was encouraged to have up my own ideas about reincarnation, but they definitely believe that, and spirits and ghosts, and I sort of always had more of a naturalistic tendency. But what I was going to say is, as a result of that, I have, when I was younger, had these spiritual feelings similar to what people are saying with their astral projections, and the people that think the, yogis can fly and you turn into energy. And I questioned, is life some sort of a dream? We're in God's mind, or we are God's mind, or the Matrix kind of a thing. Which says, well, maybe there is a way to manifest something right into your hand, right? And I've had the feeling then, so I know it's not it's the feeling does not come up with ideas that I think are correct, but it seems like you need this feeling. And what other feelings do come up? We just, like the hunger thing. Hunger's a pretty reliable one, and it, in our situation, it's not really that reliable. And just about any feeling. I've been using the example of romantic attraction as well. It's like, I believe you have to have a healthy relationship with what makes you feel romantically attracted or sexually attracted to someone. On the other hand, it tells tons of lies we all know. It tells you that's the one meant for me, and it tells you she likes me too. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. So the DNA plays the game that way. But I see it very similar in that I don't think you can have a happy life and not be paying attention to that feeling. But one bit of feedback I've been resistant to, I'm curious what you would think, is that, oh, well, choose another word, or I could at least segue to another word. And to a certain degree, I want to talk about spiritual experiences. This is a set of experiences. That's what I'm trying to understand and explain. But there's something to be said for, well, a lot of people are going out and we call it appreciating nature. So why not just call it well, because some people need to play the flute. It's not, nature, it seems like a widespread thing for getting this feeling, but, some people need to build a business. I mean, it could be anything. Well, that's why it's all wrapped up with this feeling of destiny, because like when you just feel like, what, I got to try this. Sometimes you think, oh, it's going to succeed, but if you realize, oh, it might not succeed, you still know you got to do it. I mean, I think it's related to slave revolt, for example, why we see people turn to whatever they think of as spirituality when they're enslaved for too long. So I don't know what you think about, trying to get another word. This sense of awe and beauty, it seems co-present to me with spirituality, but I'm not comfortable with saying that is a feeling of awe. I mean, I think there's fearful feelings of awe that I wouldn't call spiritual per se.
Can I chime in there, Pyrrho, for a second?
Sure. Go ahead, Carlton.
Okay. No. So I saw the link. I hope it's okay that this wasn't just a one-on-one interview. I don't mean to intrude.
No. I was just playing around with this and opening up. I was hoping someone would come in. So okay. You guys, yeah, thanks.
It's a great discussion, and I'll try not to get on my soapbox. I always do that. But to the last point, I think that one of the problems with the word spirituality is that a lot of us, and I'm an atheist, and I was a Christian for 25 years prior to being an atheist for 25 years, so both sides of the fence. I think the problem a lot of times with the word spirituality is that in my social group, I have both Christians and I have atheists, people that I like to dialogue and debate and discuss things with. The reason I steer away from the word spirituality is I think a lot of times people on the other side of the fence are too quick to pick that up and use it as a club to beat me over the head with. If I say that I had a spiritual experience, they want to immediately imply that means that I am aware that God is there and I'm somehow denying that His presence, or I'm running from God, or I hate God, or whatever the case may be. But I think you're right. I think the sensation that's there is the same sensation, and I don't think it's necessarily tied to any religion or religious ideals. I mean, for me, a simple example of spirituality was everybody remembers the movie Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams. At the end of the movie where the kids get up and stand up on the desk. Everybody in the movie theater wanted to get up and stand on the desk. It was almost compulsive. There was sort of that well of emotion that got stuck in your throat, and you wanted to stand up and cheer. That's a spiritual moment for me. That's something that reaches beyond my normal day-to-day emotions and day-to-day experiences. It's special in some way. But anyway, all that, I think, just to say that a lot of times I think people, especially that were Christians that are now atheists, are hesitant to adopt the word spirituality because of the connotations it has to people who are still Christian.
Yeah, I'm getting some of that feedback on this. But you bring up an interesting subject about the group. Some people have said that's just going to be this feeling of belonging, and it's a funny thing, and I think I'm talking about me. Maybe it just says about my psychology. I cannot say that I've ever had an experience that I would call spiritual in a group or because of being swept up in a group. I've always been sort of anti-group and antisocial enough. So maybe I'm having the feeling and then I discount it because it's like, oh no, that's just my going along with the nature. I'm all about fighting that. I'm becoming an individual. So maybe it's the same feeling and I've forced it to have a flavor that's distinct, like I dye it or salt it or something so that it seems different. Though I'm still here having this perception of it. And so I wonder, because I have been caught up in groups and in concert environments. It's really easy if you're in a big enough group and there's some focal, like either a great speaker or a band that 80% of the crowd likes. Or I just went to an Ani DeFranco concert. I didn't really know who she was, but my wife did, and I got caught up. The energy there, and I was charged from it. And come to think of it, it actually did seem spiritual. And yet I wouldn't have interpreted it that way at the concert, but it had an effect on me for a couple days that was basically triggering this feeling. Just though it's hard to say too, because I moved out to the country. I lived in Hawaii, but slowly moved into the town in Hawaii. And even though there's jungle there, you don't just go walk off and embed yourself in it. So here I've been kind of having a lot of this nature feeling, this nature spirituality, because I'm in the country and there's just nothing but woods out behind me, and so you head out there. And anyway, that's an interesting point. I mean, I'm dubious of myself of whether I've just always discounted it, but still I think I have evidence that it's not just that. I think that it's a feeling you can have as an individual, but there's got to be something pretty strong about it. My tendency is that would have been, and this is what I'm thinking over, but would have been that it's related to community because it's such an important feeling. We want to share it like so many other feelings, like laughing. We want to go to the, but maybe there is an element to, because I think what I've got from it is that there's always an element of getting a big picture and how things all fit together. So it would make sense if that was part of the DNA's plan, right? I'm looking for what's the DNA trying to fool with our head to get us to do here, and socializing is maybe one of those things. Obviously, not all animals are social, and obviously, when you look at society, spiritual movements get rolling. People spread this energy. Some of the feedback I've had is almost kind of silly, but maybe there's something to it, like, if I play with this topic that, could snowball. And definitely we see spirituality do that. It is something that's probably easier to share than a sense of humor, almost. Like easier to teach somebody a new spirituality than it is to teach them a new sense of humor, which is, it's maybe pretty contagious. Well, I'm just expositing out loud here from my inner ramble. Those are interesting points. So what do you feel? Go ahead.
Sorry. Here's an idea that came to my mind. What if spirituality is an outcome of the evolutionary drive force was to build a better brain that could be a broader consciousness. And then as a result of that, we get spirituality. So spirituality is not developing initially as a function. It's an outcome of building a more conscious brain, because a more conscious brain had a survival advantage. And then as a result of building a more conscious brain, then we come to these questions and ideas, and those questions and ideas cause us anxiety. You know, the first caveman who wondered, why in the heck am I here? But that was not a result. The evolution didn't force the spirituality. The spirituality was the outcome of developing a bigger brain that's more conscious. And then when the brain became bigger and more conscious, he survived. But he also thought, okay, why am I here? And that's where spirituality begins. Evolution isn't driving spirituality. Evolution is driving bigger, more conscious brains. And then, but we come upon these questions with a bigger and more conscious brain. And then when we come upon those questions, we come upon those cognitions, and those cognitions become the fertile ground where spirituality grows out of.
So spirituality would
just an idea.
So spirituality was sort of just along for a free ride, so to speak.
It could be symptomatic.
Okay.
Of a big conscious brain.
Right, like, so if humans have been around, let's say 200,000, I mean, it's, I guess, 100 to 200, more or less in this form, then we face this new situation, and that's where the spirituality comes from. Yeah, I guess, well, anyway, that's an interesting proposition. Another thing that had come up is, well, on that kind of topic, it's like, based on my mentioning that it's a feeling and that there might be an evolutionary reason, do animals have this feeling then? And so that's a way of addressing it, is that no, it really would be new, and it would be more likely in that case that it was an absence of stressors or something, rather than, because one would assume a brand new hunger, probably takes, tens of millions of years to develop, but we don't really know. But so one thing is, people were talking about spirit, and that it has to do with spirits, and that spirits have to be metaphysical and ghosts and this kind of thing. And so that is pause for thought, because if, well, I was told that, the word spirit has this particular meaning, and that's what it was invented to mean. But the word for spirit, in many languages, comes from the word for breath, and basically living things breathe, and non-living things don't breathe. And there's other, and that's true of all of the, animals and that we interact with, and not insects and things like that, because it's still true. But I mean, a human wouldn't necessarily know. It would notice by it moving and other things, which is why it's hard to tell if a bug is alive if it's choosing not to move, right? So anyway, really the word for spirit just comes from the idea of something's alive. When you lose your breath, then you're dead, and it seems like spirit's gone. And I hadn't even looked at it this way, but one guy, Das Spook, was mentioning that really he took that to be a claim, and it is, that the idea of an embodied spirit is older than the idea of this disembodied spirit. And really that, the part where these people might be kind of incidentally correct in spirituality and spirits is, whatever it is that makes this lump of water and calcium and salt living, I am talking about that. It has that's something I do believe. But then finally, what does that have to do with spirituality? Because I see this idea of a feeling or a lack of feeling. It could be a state of calmness, but a mental state that we are using to recognize what we're calling spiritual experiences. Is it just a coincidence, an etymological coincidence, accident of history that it's in this word spiritual, or is there really something to spirituality being a feeling, of life, of being alive, somehow directly, I don't know, appreciating it, or not being stressed out by it. Same statement, negative form. Do you have any thoughts on spirits and that word? It's similar to whether it's dangerous to play that game and use that word.
I think it's no more dangerous than using words. I'm a determinist philosophically, but I still find words like think about and decide and ruminate and reflect. Those are still useful words, even if ultimately the universe is determined. I still think those are useful words to use, and I think that parallels the idea of spirit. Even though I don't think they're supernatural, I still think the supernaturalists who are talking about spirituality are in some meaningful way talking about the same thing. If I use the word spirituality, I don't tend to, but I don't resist it either. I still think that is part of humanity, whether you happen to believe in spirits or not. That's still part of our existence. So I think we're on the same page on that. That's just part of being a human, and we're going to encounter those feelings. And if we kind of resist and deny them, well, I think your life is sort of diminished. I think you have to do something with those feelings. I don't think it doesn't serve any purpose to resist them. Now, for the language, come up with a better name for it. Maybe. I haven't heard one, so I guess we're kind of stuck with that one. And until someone comes out with a more compelling nomenclature for those experiences, I think we're stuck with spirituality.
Well, yeah, I think I'm kind of the same way on the vocabulary. I think in the same way, I would be classified as a hard determinist as well. But I think in the same way that we have the word mind and we have the word brain, and from my perspective, they're simply two different. They're two words used to view the same entity from two different perspectives, or to talk about it in two different ways. I think the word spirit or spirituality kind of falls into that same group. Whether we're talking about a life force or a spirit or whatever it is that makes us alive, it's more concise if we can just use the word spirit rather than a whole sentence to describe that condition. I wanted to try something because, Dacer, you said something earlier, and I'm sorry to backtrack a little bit, but you said something that actually fits in with something else I had been thinking about the last couple of days. If you can indulge me just 1 second and tell me if you think that this fits. This goes to the idea of people having spiritual experiences or basing their beliefs, their religious beliefs, primarily on spiritual experiences that they've had. It goes back. It's sort of, probably all remember the old Monty Hall, 3-door problem, right? Do you switch doors? You stick with the door that you got. I was just curiously looking at some Pew research and just looking at numbers of different denominations or different religious faiths across the globe. And Christians, more or less, all the denominations kind of lumped together, came out to about a third, 33% of the total of various religious faiths. And it occurred to me that was connected sort of to this Monty Hall problem, in that it seems that almost by definition, most religious people that you would talk to are fairly exclusive. If you're not a part of their religion, then you have misidentified or misconstrued the source of your spiritual experiences. And so even if you're a Christian, you have to sort of admit that we're very bad as a race as far as identifying the source of our spirituality. And if that's the case, then it seems not to make light of it, but it almost seems on the surface that whatever religion you are, if you're given an opportunity to change, you should take it. Just like the guy on Let's Make a Deal, because the odds are you probably are wrong and have misinterpreted your experiences as well. But the part that you said, Daystar, that kind of caught my attention there was, when looking at those numbers, you would have to wonder, from an evolutionary perspective, why are we so bad, piss poor actually, at identifying the correct source of our spiritual experiences as far as the source goes? But then, sort of based on what you said, though, that would make sense, because if spirituality was not something that flowed directly from its ability to give us greater survivability, but rather it was simply just an outcropping of some other feature, in this case, a larger brain, or being more conscious of our environment. That it sort of was along for the free ride, then that would make sense, because there would be no evolutionary pressure, excuse me, to help us, or to guarantee that
Oh,
we would be
thank you.
better at identifying our spiritual experiences.
There's a chip in this.
Uh-oh. And then, sorry to make that kind of long and circuitous there, but if you
Oh,
follow
sorry,
that,
guys. I thought I was muted.
no, that's okay. But would you agree with that, Daystar? Or would you? Did I connect the dots well enough? I guess probably is my first question.
Summarize what you're saying in one proposition, and I'll tell you if I agree.
Okay. You can make me do it once. Okay. The fact that we are very poor at correctly identifying the source of our spiritual experiences seems to be supported by the idea that spirituality itself doesn't give us any edge on survivability from an evolutionary standpoint, that there is no pressure to become better at identifying those spiritual experiences.
I can speak to that. I think in different situations it does, though. I think that explains, reading about Islam, it really seemed to be a better fit for those people, and in some respects it made them more successful. I think there is a survival advantage. It doesn't have to be right. You know, it's sometimes it's like the personal myths we have about ourselves. They don't have to be right. They don't have to be grounded in reality in order to have a beneficial function. You know, that to believe that you're a good person despite all those nasty things you've done. I mean, I'm directing that to anyone.
And the thing is,
that has an advantage.
The source, it's funny, we're talking about the source, and if it's a feeling, you know, then there's biochemical sources and stuff. But if we're talking about the spiritual experiences or things that have become advocated, now I think all of this spirituality has a lot of corruption in it, but, you know, basically there's a sense of humility in almost every, you know, shared spiritual system. There's a sense of doing right by other people. Now, what it means to do right can change. And even in spiritual systems you might call it spiritual that are like, well, it's dog eat dog, there's still a premise that that's what's best for people. Let people be, you know, fight for the top, and, you know, that's our meritocracy. And there's an argument that's in the benefit of people. So there's some commonalities, and so, you know, but then again, I'm kind of it could happen. I imagine how it could happen. But I think there's accidents of evolution, or like the appendix, that the value of changes, but I pretty much don't think anything slips through. I don't think there's enough room for a lot of slipping through. Things are carried through by momentum, but and then also, you know, I kind of sitting here wondering, like, and the reason I brought up the spirit and the ghost part is because I'm thinking, well, is it an accident of humanity? And my dog, I'm pretty sure she believes in ghosts. When the wind comes creaking through the house, you know, she knows there's nothing there, and she gets super anxious. Not regular, there's a dog there, there's something to fight. She gets, you know, it looks like she's scared of a ghost. So, I mean, I might be interpreting that, but, you know, because I don't think she believes that they are ghosts. I believe that we come from a place where we assumed that there could be invisible creatures because, you know what, some predators run around like that. You know, what's the difference to an animal between invisible, made of energy, which you never even thought about anyway, and just super stealthy, always behind your back? You know, I mean, those, you wouldn't have to make the distinction between those two things. And yet it is what, like, humans would think of as a spirit, a less material thing. And if you have a comment on that, but I was thinking I would like to challenge some of your guys on ideas on determinism, because I've come to just realize, as I started this just recently, that this might directly have to do with the issue of determinism and some of the feedback I'm getting is because there really is a lot of determinism out there among atheists. And it dawned on me slowly that, well, that's because the religious people can't really do that because it's all about making choices. So it's an odd sort of situation I'm in where I believe in embracing that the choice is real. Now, it could just be a compatibilist thing, but I rather don't think so. I mean, I believe that, nothing's free, right? Nothing's unconstrained, but that there is willpower, that choice is real, that there really are choices. That puts me in the theist camp, I guess, right now. So, and I think maybe this issue of spirit and it being about breath is kind of like, well, spirit is the thing that makes you not determinist, right? Because a rock's fate, water's fate, these are determined and determinable. And something with spirit, if that just means breath, breathing alive, it's the thing that appears to be non-determined. It can walk uphill. It doesn't just have to roll downhill. So, yeah, if you have feedback on either of those topics, just kind of pile them in.
Yeah, me too. Go ahead, Danny, you first.
You want to go first?
No, go right ahead. We don't really have a choice in the matter, but go ahead.
Okay, there's a couple of loose ends on the animal in our evolutionary history. Agenticity, if you know Shermer's argument on it, you know where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. That there's the survival advantage of thinking the rustle in the grass is the predator that's trying to get you. And so because of that, we have that bias to think, oh, that could be something. And then when we go and we we remove the evidence that it could be something that we're familiar with, that it could be a corporal body, then we have the persistence of belief. Oh, I was sure there was something there, but we've eliminated the qualities that would make it a corporal body. It must be something non-corporal. And there you've got that cognitive bias towards thinking that there could be agents that are non-corporal. And that's built right into how our brains work. On determinism, what did I want to say on determinism? Maybe I'll let someone else respond to that.
Let's go back. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to say that seems really insightful to me, that this idea of we learn to think of the fluttery sound in the trees as the eagle that just let off, because we don't have time to go check about it. And then if you have something like that, or it's just the wind, and there is no eagle, our brains still evolved to think, no, that's a thing. That was a thing. It was really there. So that is a very interesting, I like that theory on kind of why it's so easy to believe in spirits, because even as an adult, I caught myself in the dark going, I'm reacting to that sound like I don't know what it is. And I thought I wasn't scared of the dark. So anyway, okay, Carlton, thanks for letting me go.
No problem. This is an old conversation, not the one you're having. This one in my head. For me, I look at this. I look at our brains very much like an organic computer. I have a difficult time seeing them any other way. Mm-hmm. In that, any thought that we have, it doesn't matter how trivial or how profound, that any thought there seems to be the result of an electrical, chemical action or state that is taking place in our physical brain, and that without the physical brain, there can be no thought. There can be no awareness. And so if that's the case, then it seems to me that we are no more than automatons. If I choose to pick up this pen and I decide, well, do I click it or not, and I mull this over for a while and I finally don't click it, it was only because that's based on the current structure of my brain, the current state of my brain, anatomically how it's connected, the chemicals, the electrical impulses at that moment. That was the only thing I could have thought. That thought is the result of that flow. That there is no mechanism behind the mechanism that would allow me to control that. And so if that's the case, yeah, we have an illusion of being able to choose. We have an illusion that we have some sense of control over it, but I think it's no more than the player piano that has a sheet of paper with the holes already punched, and where the piano might think, well, I'm going to play a C sharp here. Realistically, that choice is totally illusory. It's playing the C sharp because it's punched in the paper already. And now, when I say that, I don't mean to imply that there's an intelligent determinant behind this. I simply think it's a machine. It's no different than if I sat here at my keyboard and wrote a computer program, and as part of the program, I said, when you hear a sound, put up a blue light or a green light. The program, if it becomes sentient tomorrow morning, like on sci-fi shows, it may think that it has a choice, but realistically, it's going to do what its programming says to do.
Okay, so I have a couple comments on that. First, Daystar, who was it you said that had done this research about that this evolutionary tendency for whatever to take a sign as the thing itself?
Michael Shermer. He's the Skeptic magazine. I think he's the editor-in-chief of that. And I added to that. Yeah. The perseverance of belief. I forget who did that research, but it's in psychology, the perseverance of belief. You may have heard of an experiment where they take two groups of people. They tell one group that about firefighting, that the gung-ho, brave firefighter is a more successful firefighter. They tell the other group that conservative, thoughtful, reflective firefighters make better firefighters. Then they tell them that was bullshit. We had a literature major write those up and make them sound compelling. It's crap. Now, we'd like to ask you some questions about what you actually think would be a good strategy or style for firefighter. And it shows that even if you tell them it was crap, because that crap is up there as neuron connections now, you can't just suddenly disconnect them all. They're kind of preserved. They're going to stay in there. And in the same way, if you convince yourself, oh, I think that's something in the brush making a sound, and then you look and there's nothing there, those neurons are still there.
Yeah.
It's at that level. It's at that level. I think that's a profound discovery of psychology. That it's because they're neurons. You take away one neuron that was there. Oh, I thought it was corporal. But you still have these other neurons connected that say there's still something there.
Yeah.
That's, to me, a good origin for ghosts.
Yeah, that might be. That's interesting. But so this is sort of tangential, not on that part of it. I mean, that's the point of what you're saying. But what you're talking about goes in line with cognitive science. Kind of the Lakoff's, I consider it the latest, basically second generation. I think it is cognitive science where they study it a lot. I mean, the way they've made it empirical is you can prime people. If you show people certain ideas and then ask them other questions, words you didn't mention but which are part of that framing, obviously, it takes less milliseconds for them to recognize the picture of the thing from that frame. So it's a perfect example of if you can prime people. And actually, there's an interesting book, Chomsky's book on the manufacture of consent, how the propaganda model really works is it's by what questions you ask. You can say, are they freedom fighters? And say in the article, no. And the net result is they're freedom fighters. What kind of question, because you brought in, and not because you asked, but because you brought up the framing of freedom fighters as opposed to rebel. So, on the now, I wanted to say, so for Carlton and just both of you, since you're both determinists, now a problem I have with the picture you just talked about and the player piano, or we had the modern mystic, he now goes by Beardy Man, was talking about that we're all on the disc. It's whatever comes up next on the disc. But the problem with this player piano idea is that it sort of entirely comes from physics that kind of was overthrown. The gears and tiny BB, gears and billiard balls version of mechanics, which ran up in the beginning of the 20th century against the problem of trying to model the atom. In other words, chemistry, right? Now, and they wanted to have physics about chemistry because the history of chemistry comes from alchemy, it comes from playing with this and that, and they had all kinds of phenomena. Hey, if you add this to this, this happens, it becomes bigger, this and that. And they didn't know why. They didn't really have a coherent theory of it. And so they were trying to model the atom, and you just can't do it with the gears and billiard ball view of things. You need quantum mechanics or something else, and quantum mechanics has been pretty accurate approach, where things like the electron are suddenly a cloud. In some field that relates to probability or whatever, it doesn't matter whether it's made a probability, those are semantic, but the important thing is that it really is probable. The electron is smeared out,
Yep.
and it's not in any one place until the interaction happens. Right, and that's why they called it a collapse, which is kind of bullshit, but it's important to remember the point is it exists in multiple places in space before that roll is done, before it ends up having gone one way. So this doesn't get willpower necessarily, but it does break the idea that there has to be one outcome, that rolling the dice can't have more than one outcome. It really maybe can.
Yeah, Pyrrho. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you there. And I think, and a lot of people sort of come back with that. I think that I make a distinction between talking about, when I'm talking about hard determinism in this case, yeah, I'm not talking about strictly Newtonian mechanics. I think that even if you introduce quantum physics or quantum mechanics to the equation, all it gets you, though, the only thing it gets you is it gets you randomness. In other words, if we could roll the clock back 5 minutes ago and start with exactly the same state, then there's no guarantee it's going to play out the same way that it did the first time that you did it. But that still doesn't get you control or free will.
Right.
So it simply means you lose predictability, but you still have no control over your thoughts.
Right, but now a quantum computer does an interesting kind of a process. So for example, let's use some real quantum biology that we're discovering. Photosynthesis, they've been finding out the last 5-6 years, is explained by being a quantum mechanical process. So, basically a photon hits a leaf, it has to go down, it has to bounce through a biological, channel of organic molecules somehow, a chain, and make it to the place that it's going to be absorbed and turned into sugar, I think it is, right? The chance of it doing that is like 2 or 3%. Right, because it's going to get absorbed along the way. And yet leaves actually collect more like 95, 98% of the energy. The inverse probability, the probability is switched around, and the chance of the photon making it to the center where it's turned into sugar, which is the inefficient part, that's not a very efficient energy storage, but it is nice and stable. It is switched around. So in a quantum mechanical system, which we're finding basically, you might as well call any quantum mechanical system a quantum computer. At least you can. And you have this playing with odds. You see, you have getting the edge on top of the odds. You can, by making it more likely that you only listen for successful transits, right? If you can make it more likely that if you hear anything at all, it was a successful transit, then there's this weird surrealistic thing potentially where it actually gets more likely. So I mean, if that stuff all pans out, and I think it's getting pretty certain with the photosynthesis, and there's a couple other examples from quantum biology, but even if it doesn't, we have quantum computers, and they've demonstrated little parts of them. There's room to doubt that quantum computers are going to be real, but I think that's already been pretty much demonstrated, and it's just a matter of probably a few years before we get really mind-blowing examples of these quantum techniques, and we have some, but nothing really that's computing, that's playing the odds like that quite so obviously.
Yeah, but I don't hold the position. I'm sorry, I don't hold the position religiously. I mean, I think that as we gain more science, that if we can if we can demonstrate that there's another methodology for consciousness to arise that's not dependent on a physical brain, then fine. But right now, at least, that seems to be where I'm stuck. In that, unless you're going to say, because it seems to me that if you can posit the idea that we have some sort of control that lives apart from the physicality of our brain, then you almost end up with having to say that a consciousness can be disembodied from the physical brain and still exist. That it's not the brain's not required. And I think to take
it's
that
required.
leap.
I acknowledge that it's required.
Okay, so if it's required, so then I guess the next question becomes, if it's an emergent property of the physical brain, then it would seem to me that there is no mechanism for getting behind the eight ball, so to speak. It seems like everything that happens is a result of what happens in the physical brain.
But what? Okay, I have two challenges to that.
Yeah.
Okay. But one, it would seem less like a challenge, and it's more the direction I'm going. But the challenge is, let's just use another example.
Okay.
What about the Big Bang?
Okay.
So what caused it? I mean, what you're saying is really the argument for a first cause, and if you have an infinite regression of causes,
No, I don't think so. Really? I don't see it that way. But I'm sorry, I should have interrupted.
Well, no, I'm just challenging you. I'm not even committing to say that I see it this way either. I'm just saying, if there's no way to get behind the eight ball,
right,
get a thought going, well, how is there a way to get behind the eight ball and have an infinite?
Well, because I think
mean?
the difference there, right? Because I think the difference there is that I don't have a problem with saying that the brain has to start functioning before there's a consciousness. So, okay, so we at some point, I don't know how old we need to be or when, but at some point there needs to be that first electrical impulse through those neurons, and that I guess is going to reach some critical mass at some point, and at that juncture there's going to be what we would refer to as a consciousness or an awareness. So yeah, I think that happens. It's not like there's an infinite regress, because I don't really care. I don't really care how the physical brain got there. I can stop at that point. I don't need to go back any farther.
You don't have to go any further than at least conception, or at least before the eggs and sperm were even created in that.
Yeah, because I don't think it impacts. I don't think it impacts the end question at all.
So the other thing, my other answer is just that, well, I think through reductionism, I mean, if there is willpower, that there's some physical law of nature, and yes, it's in everything. It's not a brain. It can't make decisions because it doesn't have the necessary coordination, and that's similar to the fact that this pencil doesn't act like a magnet, even though all the molecules in it are magnetic, because they're not aligned.
Right.
So, the will, the expression of will, which would, in the quantum mechanical system, most likely be the thing that makes it not random, right? If we really believe that it's random and it's rolled at the moment of interaction, that where the electron's going to hit the screen, is indeterminate until it hits the screen, and we see that it was in multiple places in space that this potential was, then will would presumably be related to some fundamental force, some fundamental field, or whatever kind of physical that helps make that guidance, and people don't want that. That's saying that like the universe has a will.
Well, I do. It's interesting. I have a friend of mine who's a deist, and she actually takes a position similar to that. Her position is different than mine. Hers is similar to what you said, that we have this consciousness that comes from our brain, but that the consciousness itself. I want to say, be careful how I say this. She's going to listen, and she's going to come hunt me down if I get it wrong. That the consciousness itself can almost, there's almost a simultaneity, that it's almost simultaneous, that the consciousness can want to think a thought, and the very act or the desire of the consciousness to want to do that causes the physicality of the impulse that then results in that thought appearing, which is a little bit bizarre, and I probably didn't do it justice. But she definitely takes a different view on this. That once that consciousness arises, that the thoughts of the consciousness itself can affect, at a quantum level, the reality that the physical brain puts forth.
Right.
Yeah, could be, but.
Well, that's a good answer. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good answer. And I think that it's you know, definitely, I don't feel like I'm at a place where I can demonstrate that intuition, and I'm pretty reductionist, and that leads me in that direction if I'm going to believe in willpower, so that I get to the point that, well, if I do believe in it, it's got to be something like this. It's got to be some sort of an emergent thing. And I understand I do though have some intuitional issues with, like, that means something's behind there pulling. You know, you get this infinite regress of, well, who's pulling the strings of pulling the strings of pulling the strings? But I mean, I just don't know. And I believe that I am sensing something that looks like choice, and I can see the possibility of it. I mean, if the brain was a quantum computer, then the quantum part is in between when you get information in and out. So anytime you get information in and out, you're going to have what we could call the collapsed version, right? You're going to have the concrete, the classical version. But in between those moments, you know, like if it's on 40 hertz, and you're going to have all the possibilities, and that's where the will would be working. It would see all the possibilities, it would have all the possibilities, and it would be the physical law that collapses it to one versus another.
Right. That's what she was saying. I think you did it better. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is, I see a couple good things about that. Okay, bad thing, oh, you know, we get the woo-woo stuff of, then you could collapse it by teleporting through walls. Well, no, because 40 hertz is pretty damn fast. There's not a lot of choice. If at some level a neuron gets to say, hey, the photon is going to, or the impulse is going to get triggered at this millisecond. No, a nanosecond earlier. That doesn't directly, you have another classical moment long before that leads to teleporting through a wall, right? So it's not actually, I mean, magic doesn't become possible except if, there's a certain amount of magic in the idea that there really is willpower, that we really have choices, that with all of the evidence of determinability that we have, you don't have to fly for that to be pretty amazing. I mean, if this phenomena achieved there being something like willpower, that you are the universe at your location, and part of that universe is this will force that can collapse the wave function.
Well, it seems, and again, I don't know nearly enough about this to speak intelligently. So, but it seems that a thought requires more than a single impulse. It seems to me that it's a collection or the total state of the brain, and if that's the case, then it seems like what we're really asking for is we're asking for quantum behavior at a macro level. So we're asking for the will to be able to simultaneously collapse the wave function of all the electrons in the brain that in total would generate a particular thought. And I'm like, well, how would it know which ones to collapse? How would it know which ones to observe? How would that apply at the macro level?
Well, I have a couple things to answer that. I mean, one, it would be happening at brainwave frequencies, like 40 hertz, which I use because that's what goes away under general anesthetic. So let's say it's 40 hertz. So you have classical moments, classical collapse on a schedule, on a tick, 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 tick schedule, 40 times a second. So you can't get very far. So there's no teleporting through the wall because that would take longer, and you don't have that long in possibility land, right? And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, should there be a term for this, but we're creatures of psychology. I have watched my own behavior enough to know, and you guys seem like the kind of guys that have probably noticed this in yourself, that there is a lot of domino work, falling in our behavior when we react to somebody cutting us off in traffic or whatever kind of example you want to use. We just react, and I have found that willpower for me it's not in the moment. I mean, it's great when in the moment you can pull off something, but basically no. I mean, the best you can do to change how you behave in a situation is anticipate the situation and prepare your automatic reflexes such that you automatically react well, because you have only a little tiny bit of power at the moment to remember, oh wait, I didn't want to do that again. You know what I mean? You have to set it up so that it does not take a lot of energy to say, oh no, I want it to go this other way. So I really feel that, you know, our behavior is mostly determined, and I, as a non-determinist believer in willpower, you know, I think that the amount of willpower we have to spend at a moment is way less than the energy that's making us behave at that moment, right? So it takes a lot of preparation, and, you know, you can train yourself. After the fact, with your, you know, remorse, you can go, okay, I'm going to think, next time Johnny says that, I'm not going to hit him with the bat. I'm not going to hit him with the bat, you know.
Well, yeah, and I think yes, I've got to run here, guys. My wife is yelling at me, but let me just say this has been a great hangout, and I appreciate you guys letting me partake. I think the other sort of a parting thought there, which I think may have parted ahead of me. The hell was that I was going to say? Crap. Oh, okay, I know. It was a real parting thought. Yeah, I collapsed the wave function and created my own reality. Right. I think that what I was going to say there is that to some extent, you know, even though I'm a determined, even though I think that we're automatons, I think that it's sort of like the concept of saying, well, are we in the matrix? Well, I can't prove that I'm not in the matrix, but so therefore, my only option is really to pretend like is to behave like I'm not in the matrix. Is okay? I mean, I have no other real option here, and I think it's the same with this. So even though I believe that I have no control over my thoughts, I have to continue to act as though I think I do. That just seems to be the nature of reality, or the nature of consciousness.
Right.
I'm doomed to perceive myself as having choice and free will. And so it's sort of, on the one hand, it's almost a moot point, you know, that I have no control. It's not even important. And yet, on the other hand, I think in a lot of ways it's profoundly important. I think it can be important in terms of our relationships with each other.
Right.
So, like you said, you know, the being in traffic and somebody slams their brakes on in front of me, you know, I'm getting angry at that person. And it does, in a weird way, sort of this idea that I have no control takes root in my own thoughts, that I find myself catching my anger, if you will, and saying, well, they had no more choice in calling me an idiot than I have in the way I'm reacting. And so what's the point here of doing this? And it almost changes the programming as it goes, sort of the idea that it's there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do have to run, guys. And what's he holding up there? Free will. What is that? Sorry, I couldn't see it.
It looks like a book, but it's
is that a book? Yeah.
Is it a video game? Because I want to play that. It'd be a fun video game.
Yeah, it's out of focus there at the bottom. I can't read that.
It's tiny. You're gonna have to talk so you go full screen. I don't know how to zoom in on you, but there probably is a way, huh?
That's Sam Harris's Free Will. It's a very short.
Oh, okay. I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's an interesting read. It's very readable. If you're a non-determinist, I'd recommend it, and if you're a determinist, I'd recommend it. Yep. Also, Daniel Dennett's response, his sort of compatibilist response, is an interesting. He's posted that as I think it's available online somewhere. But definitely an interesting dialogue between him and Sam Harris.
Okay, awesome. I'll go.
It won't take up too much of your time either. I think it's less than 100 pages, but it's a good read.
Very good. Awesome. All right, guys, I got to run. Thanks again. I added you guys both, so I hope I get to see you again here soon. Have
cool, yeah, I don't know when I'll do it, but I'd like to do this regularly, so we'll see.
All right, ciao.
All right, thanks for coming in. Yeah, so the thing with that comment, I didn't want to say, hey, let me tell you one more thing before your wife yells at you for being extra long. I have a respect for the compatibilist view. I think that makes sense. On the other hand, I don't always, and so usually I don't pick at the determinists for that. I do believe that determinism should come up with language, just as a thought experiment for fun to see how it is, for describing things without using the words judgment and what would be better and what would be worse, because these things really do depend on choice being real. On the other hand, I try not to use it as too cheap of a gotcha, because even if you did that and the words sounded silly, well, that's just in the contrast of how we live, and we still talk about the sun coming up even though we know, because come on, it looks like it comes up for us, it does come up, that's the way it is. Right. So if Yeah, but I think it does show that there's sort of an open question, because really I want that kind of an explanation is the goal. I could see myself giving into a determinist view kind of thing, but I want that kind of an explanation. I don't expect it right here and now. It's not fair to demand it right now. It's an ancient question we're looking into. Maybe we'll get there. But I want to know, just like I know when we say the sun comes up, what's really going on. I want to know what's really going on. And I'm the kind of person that when we talked about spiritual experiences, you know, I have them sometimes when I think through my little thought experiments. And one thing I find really spiritual is when I can imagine in the sunrise that I'm on a globe spinning into the light out of the shadow. I'm like, yay. So I want to be able to go, you know, and I can almost imagine a compatibilist view where I realize how it really is determined, and that gives me a big thrill, you know, to know that illusion, and I'll still watch the sun come up, you know.
The sun, good example, and good contrast. We have the Earth, the globe of the sun, and their motion in three-dimensional space. When you want, I would like an explanation of determinism. We're talking about an organ that has 100 billion neurons. Any of those neurons can have thousands, as many as 10,000 connections. We're talking about and then that's the macro level. When we're talking about a brain, that's the macro level. The micro level might even, you know, Penrose could be right. The microtubules, there could be some complex things going on at that level. So we're talking about something so complex. It's just...
Well, I think Hameroff has proved it, actually, as far as his issue with, you know, the version of the computational AI version of consciousness, that when it gets complex enough, we'll have the same thing going on. You know, he doesn't think that that's it. He thinks it has to be some sort of a quantum system, you know, or a quantum computer. But he points out that actually there is no, it's not controversial. The microtubules are like the little neurons inside the eukaryote. That's how the messages are carried inside there. And it's got as many of those, I think, as we have neurons, or maybe it's, you know, different by a factor of 1,000 or something. But I mean, there's millions of these things inside each cell. And so, you know, you've got this, I don't know, I forget the numbers he gives, but 1,000,000 or trillion-fold just to get to the computational complexity, which to me is almost a naive and hopeful and silly mistake for the computational AI guys to make, because, you know, they're actually going to say that all the behavior of a eukaryote, you know, of a neuron in this case, but the, you know, the equivalent of a, you know, an amoeba or paramecium that runs around hunting, you know, all kinds of behaviors, and that is going to be computationally as simple as one transistor, you know, one operation. No way, you know. So we have a lot longer to wait to find out, you know, if that solution works. And the funny thing, though, is by the time we're going to run into this Turing test thing, because I believe computers will be able to act convincingly emotionally. Right. Just like you can approximate one system with another system, right? You can approximate any curve with, you know, a Fourier transform, or any curve with the Taylor series. You know, we're going to get that, and we'll face this question of whether or not it's really that way on the inside. And knowing human beings, and going back to the rustle in the grass and our evolutionary tendencies, if we get, you know, computers that act like humans with emotions, people will tend to just accept that and go, well, I don't know, but I better treat it, you know, like, you know, I treat humans. Nice people will be nice to it, and rude people will be rude. So, but anyway.
I was listening to a podcast from BBC on consciousness. They had some computer people there, they had some psychology people there, they had a philosopher there. And they said right now they're modeling on a computer something that would be about as complex as a small insect. But this is growing. And it's within the scope that perhaps within a generation or so we might have the computer power to simulate a fairly complex brain. But of course we have to understand what we're trying to simulate.
Yeah.
And we, in some serious ways, we don't really understand what we're trying to simulate yet. But once the computing power is there, certainly then people can start experimenting.
Yeah.
You know, if we have something that has the computing power of a brain, but we don't know how to structure and coordinate it, that's the real problem.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I think they did do a lot of good stuff in AI and neural networks, and it'll be interesting to have computers getting to the level where we can really, because there's been a lot of adaptive processes, neural networks, genetic programming, these things have worked, and it just looked like, well, they can't really solve problems complex enough for us to get that sense of AI that Turing told us. You know, look for animal behavior, or look for human behavior, he said, but we'd be happy if it acted as natural as a dog, right? Or an insect. But the problem with insects is we ignore so much of the, like, what you might call the potential emotional life of an insect that, you know, makes it easy to make a robot look like an insect when people aren't paying that close attention to insects. But, you know, the, what are they? I always get this one, entomologist. Is that the one about where the words come from? Anyway.
No, you're right. That's the study of
okay.
insects.
So they'll know the difference. But yeah, if you take an animal, so it's an interesting thing. I mean, it could be that a neuron, while it's a complex, you know, singular life form on its own, that it doesn't contribute that to our own brain, right? That it just, maybe all it contributes is the complexity of a transistor or something like that. And we might actually be able to do it. But I think that we are going to be able to make convincing human beings with more or less the you know, the small spectrum of AI techniques that we came up with when AI was so hot, you know, more sophisticated, but case-based reasoning, neural networks, genetic programming. I think we will, and with the genetic programming, you know, you end up growing programs you don't understand, which adds this mystery of, well, what's going on inside it. On the other hand, I used to think, I mean, I love that stuff, and I worked in a game AI that was kind of complex like this, and we, you know, I got to play around with all those ideas, and I forget exactly when it was before that. It wasn't because of failure. That all went really well, and I thought, I can make behavior that's really, you know, good enough for a game. But I just, looking at the Turing machine, I thought, you know, this thing is never going to have an internal life. And it could pass that Turing test, but I just don't see that. Whereas I do see a quantum computer possibly having an internal life. And it's not just because it's more mysterious. It has to do with the fact that a quantum computer is all about, you got this wide range of options, and you make the option you want more likely. Maybe it starts out at the 2%, you make it 98%. 2% of the time it doesn't go the way it wants. 98% of the time it does. You have a series of 50, 98%. You start getting really close to 100. You know, you can make things happen. You know, theoretically with a computer like that. But I would have to say, I just think it's possible.
Here's my idea. I'm really interested in consciousness and the problem of consciousness, and I'm a grad student in psychology, but I'd like to go that way, but it's just not as employable. Mm-hmm. But here's my idea: is that we have these engines in our brain that are problem solving all the time, and we're not conscious of them. We have the tip of the iceberg. That's consciousness. It's really, there's really not much you're really conscious of at any one moment. Mm-hmm. But there's, maybe I should start here. You know, we actually learn to identify that our body is us. That's a learned process. I think part of consciousness is learning to identify with, and the part of the development of a sense of self is a development of learning to identify that those thoughts in our brains, those feelings, are us. And I think that can be disrupted with some kinds of brain injuries. So, for example, you may have an inner voice that you don't identify as you, and people might call that an auditory hallucination. But it's because there's been a disruption in that part of our brain that gives us a sense that those thoughts, those feelings are you. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something to chew on. I have to get to my studies now.
Oh,
I'm writing
great, because
something
I was
on
just about
ethics
to say
today.
I've got to go too. It's midnight here, and I thought that was a great summary. And you brought up a bunch of food for thought, which is great because I've been getting so much resistance on this, and not just critical resistance like I don't agree, but kind of like, no, you must mean ghosts. I really appreciate your input, and it's nice. It's nice to make an acquaintance with you. So I wrote down your name, and I don't know if you want to leave a comment or how we can make sure, but I would love to notify you again when I do this again if you're free, because I found this a really great and productive conversation on this topic. So thanks a lot, Daystar, and I'll talk to you later.
Sure, I'll find you.
All right. Yeah. Cheers. Take it easy. All right, goodbye, everybody. It's midnight here in beautiful Maine, and that was my, I forget if I mentioned that that's when I was going to end, but that is when I was going to end. All right, bye.